I'm the only one with big headphones.
That's right.
I'm not at all embarrassed by that, though. I just wanted to add that in. These are old school, by the way.
It sounds great. We can hear you perfectly. Okay. Let's check this out. Just make sure. All right, we are live. Perfect. Shut this volume off here. All right, we've already got one comment. Hey, Nancy, how's it going? So thank you everyone for being here, for those of us on the call and for those of us joining, or those of you joining to watch either, sorry, we're getting a text from our other guest here, either on Facebook now or YouTube later. And if you guys just give me 1 second, I will get Chris in here with us. While we're doing that, I'm going to have everyone go around and introduce themselves. And let's have Zach go first. If you want to just say who you are, where you live, and how you're connected to education.
Thanks. My name is Zach Suresig. I live in Chaska. I'm a parent in the district. I have 3 daughters that attend elementary at La Academia here in Chaska. And I'm connected to the district because I've recently started a public education advocacy group called Team 112. And I'm very excited to be a part of this conversation.
Right,
it's as short and sweet as I get.
Perfect. Love it. Let's go with Sean.
Hi there, I'm Sean Olson. I'm a parent of 3 kids in the district. This fall we'll have 1 at Chaska High School and 2 at Jonathan Elementary. So I guess that's a pretty direct connection to the district. For the last couple of years, I've led a group called Even Better Eastern Carver County Schools, where we pushed for some reforms in how we've worked with personalized learning and tools like Empower and equity efforts. And last year during the referendum campaign, we worked pretty hard to try and dispel some of the misinformation that was out there. I also recently announced that I'll be a candidate for school board in November.
Awesome. I'm excited to support you for that. All right, let's go with Andrew.
Hi. So Andrew Waller, I am a teacher in the district. I teach at the middle school, one of the middle schools here. We live in Carver. We have 3 kids, and our oldest is actually going to become a student in the district. She'll be a kindergartner coming up this year, and 2 others lagging behind her. So that's our invested interest here.
Great. And let's go with Dee Dee.
Hi, I'm Dee Dee Caring, and I actually live in Minneapolis, but I work at Eastern Carver County Schools. I'm the Director of Finance and Operations. Been there almost 11 years.
Awesome. So Chris, we're just saying who you are, where you live, and how you're connected to the district.
Hi, Addie. Hi, everybody. Thanks. I'll adjust my lighting here in a second. Good to see you all. And I'm out in Benton Township. I'm in 47A, but part of SD 47. And I've been with an employee, with a teacher with Eastern Carver County Schools about 27 years. Good to see everybody.
And he's my former teacher too. So he's probably got some stories about me for later. All right, let's go with Nadia.
My name is Nadia Joseph, and I live in Chanhassen. And my connection to this district is I just graduated in June from Chanhassen High School.
Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
All right, Natalie.
Hi, everyone. I'm Natalie Williamson. I also graduated from Chanhassen High School, but in 2019. So I'm a former student at Chan. I live in Chanhassen, and now I go to American University in Washington, D.C.
Awesome. Congrats on that. It's a great school. And last but not least, Robbie.
Hello, I'm Robbie Wichterman. I'm a recent Chanhassen High School graduate, and I live in Dahlgren Township, which is out in the boondocks.
I know I have a good friend from there, so it's a beautiful place there. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. We're going to try to be respectful of this hour time that you all are donating to this conversation. So for those of you who are watching who don't know me, my name is Addie Miller. I am a candidate for the Minnesota State Senate for our district. So that's basically all of Carver County. And typically we follow a structure. If you've watched these before, you know we do a campaign update, COVID update, capital update. We're not doing any of that today. Today, we are talking about education in the district. So I want to say right off the bat, too, that anyone who's participating in this call today doesn't necessarily mean that they're endorsing my campaign. It just means that they're an expert that has come to the table to lend their voice and their expertise. So, you know, unless they explicitly say otherwise, this is not necessarily an endorsement of my campaign. So, and a lot of you know, if you've watched this before, we've had conversations before, that I really believe that the best way to be a leader, whether that's in business or state government, local government, is to get all the experts to the table, get rid of all the rhetoric and the messaging, get the people who know what's going on, and be a kind of collaborative effort to get to the best solution. So that is what we're doing here today. We're going to have an open discussion about the current state of affairs in Carver County education and talk about the future of the district and how state government could help with that. So logistics wise, if you are watching on Facebook Live, we can't see that you're watching unless you put a comment. So throw an emoji up in the comments if you want to say hi. We're getting already a lot of thanking Mr. Waller for your LTE. So congrats on that. If you have not read his letter to the editor, I highly recommend it as well. And if you have any questions as we go along, please feel free to throw those in the comments as well. So we've got a few questions to kind of get the ball rolling, and we'll take your questions as we go on too. So the first one, and we may not get to everybody answering every question, so just bear that in mind. So the first question is, how is public education in Minnesota currently funded? I feel like Dee Dee should take this one first.
I had a feeling that would come my way.
Yeah.
So public education, the majority of it comes from state funding. So in the form of state aid, and about 70 to 73% of our funding comes from state aid. And then a portion of it comes from local property taxes, so local government. The smaller portion is federal government. And then the last is other, which could be fees from patrons, you know, going to a football game, you pay a gate fee, that type of thing. So those are the 4 buckets of money that come in to fund public education.
Helps if you unmute. So there's a kind of special avenue for special education funding. Would you like to touch on that as well?
Sure. Special education funding, if school finance funding is very complicated in the state of Minnesota anyhow, for the, let's say for the general fund, which is the majority of the money we get for educating kids. Then on top of that, then we get special education aid, and that is funding to help students with special needs. And that's even more complicated, and we're not fully funded for that under federal law, which we were supposed to get. But there is also both federal funding that comes in for special education, as well as federal aid as well. It doesn't cover the total cost of educating students with special needs. So the gap in that is then covered with the general education aid. Now keep in mind, all of our kids, regardless of their special needs or not, are always first considered a general education student. And then if they have special education needs, then there's some additional funding. But as I mentioned, I don't know of any school district that is fully funded for their special education costs.
Yeah, Zach's raising his hand. Go right ahead.
I don't know if we're supposed to raise our hand for this, but maybe Mr. Waller or Mr. Commerce can help work on the logistics on that. But I had a question about funding myself. I know a little bit about school funding, and I know obviously Dee Dee is somebody I would definitely classify as an expert, and Sean Olson, I believe, knows a lot about this as well as Mr. Commerce. But how does it work in terms of what I've read a lot about is the per person student that gets allocated from the state level? How does that work, and how is that determined? As a parent, I would like to know that.
Sure. So for state aid, that is, and of course you're going to test me now. I told Zach I didn't read the questions until about 2 minutes ago. So I could have picked up on some of it, but the state aid category, the amount is, say it's $6,300 per student. And each one of our students is grade aided based on level. So we get a little bit more money for high school students. So a high school student is weighted a little heavier than, say, an elementary student, because there's just more costs related to things such as sciences, math, Project Lead the Way, those types of things. So there's a little bit different weighting on that. So each pupil unit, so if I am a student and I go all year, I'm a full-time student. I'm a 1 ADM, average daily membership. I'm getting kind of into the weeds here. But consider that like a full-time equivalency of a employee, okay? But if I come part year, I might be a 0.75 ADM. So that dollar amount times the weighting that I talked about based on the grade level times their FTE is what generates the aid. Likewise, we get, if we have an operating referenda, that also, which is a local tax pay, is based on the number of students and those ADMs as well. So federal is also, so looking at the student count and being able to count our students is very big in determining what our state, federal, and local aid is that we get.
So the state sets the amount per the classification, and then whatever you report to the state in terms of the classification determines how much money you directly get from the state.
Correct. Set by the legislature. Mm-hmm.
And so the Waconia School District, if you had a full-time high school student, they would get the same amount from the state of Minnesota as would Eastern Carver County or Belle Plaine or any of our other neighboring districts.
Yes.
In theory.
Property tax, it's different, and federal, it can be different. So, and there's some differences as it is for metro versus outstate. So it's not pure, but it's pretty close.
Okay. Thank you.
And Chris, if I could, or Sean, either one, if I could ask you, traditionally, the legislature has funded education at a certain level, and it's kind of changed over the past 10 years, maybe 8-10 years. Could you touch on that? How's the reality now?
Well, I guess I can start. I mean, really, since 2002, that basic per pupil amount that Dee Dee was referring to has not kept up with inflation. So every school district is running across the state is basically running several $100s per student below where they would be funding wise had funding just kept up with inflation. So you've seen pressures on districts across the state to either raise local property taxes to make up the gap or make spending reductions to try and make the budget fit. So without that consistent commitment by the state to at least keep districts whole, we're kind of tightening the ratchet down on districts every year. So, and with, excuse me, the state projected to be in deficit again next budget cycle, we're at risk again for another budget that doesn't keep pace.
Thanks, Sean. I would just add, and I too would defer to Sean and Dee Dee on precision and accuracy. But if we were to go back to 2003, Sean, you mentioned 2002. If we look at where state funding per pupil, Addie, was in 2003, if that had remained consistent with the rate of inflation, Eastern Carver County schools in the last academic year, 2019-2020, would have had an additional $6 million to use, which is roughly what we cut this this year with the failure of the operating levy. So there's just some really concrete numbers there. I think that, the larger discussion, what we're talking about is the, air quotes, the formula. And I think we really have probably, a handful of people in the state of Minnesota who really could explain the entire formula and all of its implications. So for quite some time, a lot of folks have asked for reform, in that area. And as we think about equity with regards to funding and more transparency in terms of where are our tax dollars going and how they're being used, we could do better, I think. Not that I'm prepared to fix that in this conversation.
That's why I'm here, right? No, well, it's just working at the Capitol. I worked on the higher education committee, so I didn't work too closely with the E12 committees, but from hearing, the discussions that I did hear, it is incredibly complicated. And there are a lot of opinions, a lot of rhetoric around this that we kind of need to dig through the weeds. So hopefully we can do that here in this groundwork with this conversation. So you touched on the kind of failure of the referendum the last cycle. What does that mean? So this would be to the teachers, parents, and students here. What does that look? How does that affect you? Let's start with Mr. Waller.
Sure. So it means we've lost a lot of our colleagues. Some really excellent educators we've had to say goodbye to this past year. Yeah, there you go, Zach. And that's a shame. And then when they step out, when all of that talent steps out the door, that increases the workload of all of us who are left. So we're seeing increased class sizes. We're seeing increased sections of kids. So for example, I am being asked as a middle school teacher to take on a whole new section of kids. So I've got about 35 more kids and less time to now prepare lessons for those kids, and less time to build relationships with those kids, and less time to give them meaningful feedback. So instructionally, academically, it's a struggle because it's a bigger workload with less time to do that workload. And then in addition to that, just on a human level, it makes it more, I worry it's going to make it more difficult to build relationships and connections with our kids. We pride ourselves in the middle school of making sure every kid has a real personal advocate for that student. And when you have more kids and less teachers building those relationships, you end up spreading yourself a little bit more thin. And that's really difficult.
Do any of the students want to comment on that? I know my education probably looked a little bit different than your guys's did, and then our generations after us too. Is if we keep going down this path of not fully funding public education, it's going to look more different and more different every year. So would you guys like to add anything on how that affects you? Does it affect you? Does it affect the student morale, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think a lot of the stuff that we saw, or the changes that I saw in my 4 years in high school especially, were things that I couldn't pinpoint to a loss of funding, but rather just things changing. And I saw that it definitely had like a negative impact on my own learning when I saw like my class sizes getting bigger, or I saw that my teachers, they were either assigning less stuff because they didn't have time to grade it all, or the stuff that they were assigning, they were saying like, I'm so sorry, this is going to take me a while to grade because I have all of these other things to do. And so there was a lot of adaptation on like my part and a lot of my friends' parts in order to try and find like those connections with teachers and find ways to make the learning the best it could be for us. But there were definitely changes that I saw even within the 4 years. So I can't even imagine what students are going to start seeing in the next few years when these big changes start to really take place that will clearly have an impact on every single student.
Yeah, to build off what Natalie is saying, obviously I won't be here for the next school year, but I still have a lot of friends and relatives that will be. And I know one big thing for them for the high school is moving to a 6-period day. Suddenly they can't take classes that they want to take, particularly like extra classes to explore their interests. And I know for me, getting to explore my interests and figure out, what I wanted to do in college was really helpful. And now with students only having 1 or 2 periods a year to explore those interests, I think is going to very negatively impact them in the future. And having to drop things like world languages to be able to take more required courses or drop out of their music classes, things that they really enjoy, I think will be very unfortunate for them.
And if I can add just one more thing too, because I saw someone mention in the comments, just the added workload that comes along with the pandemic that we're facing right now, where not only are we potentially going to be teaching kids in school, but now we're also simultaneously teaching kids online who may not be coming to school, or figuring out how to manage that. So we're going to have to figure out how to do that. And then, we rely heavily on our technology support, but our, tech support in all of the buildings just got cut in half, if not more than that this past year too. So again, there's more to do, and we're going to have less to do it with.
Yeah, and if I could add on that, not only do we have a new emerging public health crisis, but we've also seen a recent increase in the mental health crisis as well. And to me, at least, and for many kids my age, teachers and classes that normally let you be creative, that always, at least in my case, has helped me with my own mental health, and especially with the Yellow Umbrella campaign, which was sort of a campaign to let kids know that teachers are always available to talk. Now we have less time available to have those conversations with kids and be able to better help their mental health. And there's less time to do things like that, and then there's less art classes available, less classes that lets kids be who they want to be. That mainly, for me anyways, helps mental health.
Absolutely. And that's just heartbreaking. I mean, some of my best memories in Chaska High School, especially, was the extracurricular stuff. So the thought of that even being cut or in danger is heartbreaking. Yeah, Zach, did you want to add?
I have 2 questions. One's for Nadia and Robbie. I believe you both said you were graduates this last year from Chan High School. I was just curious for you two, if things about school funding and the referendum vote, because it was such a heated thing online in the community this last year, if you ever caught any of that at school. And then I had a question for Sean as a parent, because my children being in elementary, we don't talk about period days and class selections and things of that nature, because we just send them to the building and they go to school. But I was curious for Sean, having kids up to the high school level now, if that impacted their class selection as you were going through and picking out schedules for this next year. So yeah, Robbie and Nadia, I was just curious if you could chime in on that, about if any of the topics about school funding came up at school last year amongst you and your peers.
Yeah, it was actually a very, once the referendum happened, it was a very big deal among people, especially for people younger than me, who all of a sudden were really concerned about what they had planned for the rest of their high school career all of a sudden wasn't going to be able to happen. I had one teacher in particular who really valued us being informed and would just start class with talking about the referendum for 10-15 minutes every day for like a month, which was really helpful for us to process what had just happened, and also then figure out what like effects it had on our future. And I'd say for me as a senior, it definitely didn't affect me as much as it affected some of my classmates, but for some of them it was really hard because they had very specific things they wanted to do and complete before they graduated, and now they were very unsure of what was going to happen, and they really wanted a place to discuss that with their other peers.
Yeah, and then to add on that, I think there's a lot of tip of the iceberg stuff when it comes to school funding, but the things that us students saw was things like our favorite teachers, mainly the younger teachers who haven't been working there as long, being, maybe the first people to lose their jobs, as well as 5th grade band maybe being cut. I've been a band kid since 5th grade, and that's when my aspirations started for music, and that's when a lot of my peers' aspirations started for music, and we all had these long conversations about what would we be, or where would we be without 5th grade band. I have many friends who want to be music teachers, music educators, professional musicians, who all started because they had this opportunity to take 5th grade band in person, in school, and things like that, and the teachers are all on the surface, but it still was a big deal to us as students.
Yeah, and I guess from a parent perspective, Zach, I mean, we've encountered, a lot of the things that the students have mentioned. Our oldest is starting 9th grade, and in middle school for her, kind of the light bulb went on for her in terms of math, and so before the budget cuts, she was planning on doubling up on math in 9th grade to try and get up on the higher track. And ultimately, when it came to registration this year, she had to decide whether to keep on that plan or to stay in band. And ultimately, she decided to stay in band. So and she's obviously not the only one who had to look at her schedule and make those sorts of trade-offs. So everyone in our situation is getting impacted by that. And then obviously at the elementary school level, we're seeing the increased class sizes. Our 5th grader, from what we understand, is going to have a 30 plus kids in her class this year. So I mean, that's going to be, no matter which of the 3 models we end up going with, that's going to be a huge challenge for that teacher to handle. So yeah, I mean, I'm sure just like your family, we feel the impacts of those cuts every day. So
I know Carver County is known around the state for having really, really great education. I'm really proud of that too. So for the parents on this call, what have you guys heard about, living in this district? I know there's a lot of folks that move out here for this district. Are they worried about the future? Are they worried that, like in the comments, Amanda said she's worried about this being set as a precedent. Do you think that that's on folks' minds? Let's go with Zach on that one.
Yeah, I think that to answer your question, yes, I think it is on people's minds. And is this setting a precedent? But myself, I know how I felt, how I internalized when I first got involved with everything last year in the school district. I felt like I wasn't paying attention before, and everything that happened last year, what started with the racist incidents at the high school, everything leading into last summer when the district announced they were doing the referendum, and then this heated campaign, and a lot of the discussions around equity work. And shame on me. And I've heard this exact same thing from a lot of parents. I wasn't paying attention, but now I feel I am. And I'm not worried about precedent being set in terms of defeating votes. What I'm worried is that we're not going to capture the energy that's going on right now in terms of, we've got a great new superintendent in the district. Parents are telling me left and right that they're paying attention now. Got a lot of teachers that I talk to behind the scenes that are super fired up. And, and never mind the fact that by the way, we've got a pandemic going on, depression-like economic situation happening. And that is the backdrop of all of this. The only thing that I'm concerned about moving forward is trying to make sure that I stay engaged and help other parents stay engaged. And that if we don't want to have what happened last year and have this be the result again. Pictured on here are 2 first-year teachers from La Academia, where all 3 of my children go, and they were great first-year teachers. And Andrew probably had colleagues at his school that are no longer there, and we all know people who are on that list. And I think that's my big concern, is making sure that we stay engaged and capture the energy that's going on right now with wanting to be engaged and wanting to help push the district forward. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely. And we did touch on a little bit earlier about kind of the spark of this whole thing, the kind of racist and bullying incidents in the school. So if we could start with any of the students that would like to comment on this, what was that like, that initial incidents, or did it happen a lot? And we only focused on a few in the media. And then if we could go with either Dee Dee or Chris or Sean talking about how that played out at the adult level, at the funding level, and how a little, thing that could have been handled on a school level exploded into the failure of the referendum, essentially.
Yeah, I think the first signs that I saw of it was actually during the 2016 election. At Chanhassen High School, especially, there were a lot of incidents that, were not necessarily as blatantly racist as the ones that we've saw in these past years, but we had multiple Trump rallies where people were dressing up like Trump and people were shouting, "Build the wall" during lunch. There was the student group GSA who had a protest against all of the Trump praising that was happening in school, and they were physically assaulted by Trump supporters, and all of this stuff kind of hit under the radar because of how crazy the times were then. But I remember even as a sophomore then being incredibly uncomfortable by what was going on and realizing how big of an issue this was. I also think beyond that, though, that this is something where, these blatantly racist stuff has come out and they've gotten a lot of media attention, and people are shocked by it, especially at Chanhassen. Everyone's like, oh, look at Chaska, like they're having all of these racist incidents, but the same stuff is happening at Chan, and it's worse, I think, at Chan, but there's absolutely no conversation around it. I know something that was especially enlightening to me was the ProPublica's Miss Education Minnesota series, in which they looked a lot about the discrepancies between students for discipline based on race and students who are able to achieve by going into like AP classes and accelerated courses, and the discrepancies there. And I think just every single part of the culture of Chanhassen High School and Chaska High School, and I think a lot of this district breeds that kind of stuff. And so far, the only action that I've seen has kind of become or has happened after these really like not good scenarios happen in which people finally put their foot down. But this problem has been going on for a while. It's still continuing to go on. And there's a lot of like fundamental changes that need to occur in order for us to stop having those things that are going to get the media attention.
To kind of build off what Natalie is saying, I really agree that at Chan we did have a lot of issues, particularly not with like big issues, but more just small, subtle things that were happening in everyday life. And you, a lot of times you just hear comments in the hall that you kind of be like, you know what, that just doesn't sound right. Like that doesn't sound okay. But because it wasn't some like big obvious statement, people just wouldn't do anything about it. And so I had a lot of friends who are students of color who would just feel really uncomfortable on a daily basis because of all these small comments being made and because no one was doing anything about it. And it really took for these big incidents to happen for people to kind of realize it was happening, because I think most students just assumed that everything was fine because there were no big incidents, when in reality it was kind of commonplace.
And Chris or Dee Dee, or Sean too, how did this spark into the discussion around the referendum? And how did it tie into the finance piece of the referendum? I know there was kind of two planes of discussion on that.
Well, Addie, we're covering a lot of territory in a few minutes. I think I would just really quickly what has, we also have to put things into context, in Minnesota and in the United States. And sadly, we're not alone in terms of the institutional racism and problems of achieving racial justice in public education. I think that we catch a lot of news because we are sort of in the midst or at a flashpoint geographically in the culture wars. You know, we saw it in Edina and Anoka a couple of years ago. But if we go back in time, you know, it's been a decade since Richfield went through similar events, and so it is, you know, soul killing and tragic, and but it also, I think, we do need to look at what we're going through in this point in our history in a larger context. I think that to your point about the operating levy and the other parts of the referendum vote, the vote no campaign was really able to capitalize on this and misdirect and misguide and mislead and misinform the public. To Zach's point, I think that, and again, not just 112, but Minnesota and the United States, you know, over the last couple of decades, as our culture has continued to speed up, a lot of people have let go of their civic duties. And I think, you know, if there's anything that that comes out of the tragic period that we're living through right now, it is a consciousness that we do need to be citizens. I'm a citizen / teacher, and I cannot say that I'm not engaged or not involved. So Don Huizenga is the architect of the Vote No campaign. He is very involved, wonderful in terms of his activism. I want to be really clear whenever I speak publicly about Don Huizenga, that's with an E in the Huizenga. We have a colleague who taught at Chaska High School whose name is Don Huizenga. And we've got to just be very careful that we're not confusing these two gentlemen. Don Huizenga is a businessman. He lives in Anoka and he owns commercial real estate in Chanhassen. And what he was able to do with Alpha News was, and Alpha News is an online pseudo news source, they were able to build a narrative that if the operating levy passed, dollars would be used to make our schools and our things we've been talking about in really addressing some of the racism and other issues that we've got, that that the operating levy would be funding that, and that somehow not only would we be doing good things for all students, but that we were indoctrinating students to become Muslims, and that we were just really sort of absurd, beyond belief claims about what was happening in our schools. And sadly, the level of fear in 2020 in Minnesota or in Carver County, that resonated. And the truth, and others can speak more eloquently to this, but the work that we're doing that we call equity, which basically is part of personalized learning. How do we meet each child where they are, and how do we nurture their academic and personal growth, is all it is not coming out of the operating levy. And so it was a shell game, and it worked. And you heard earlier the repercussions.
Mr. Waller, I want to ask you this question. I already know the answer, but I just want you to say it. Are teachers allowed to talk about their politics in class?
So it's, yes, it's interesting, but we don't advocate for any political positions. We're very careful about that because that's not our job. However, there are times when I don't know how to teach the curriculum without bringing it up. For example, I'm a social studies teacher, so we'll teach branches of government and separation of powers and powers in the Constitution, such as impeachment. Well, I'm not doing my job if I don't mention, hey, by the way, this is literally happening as we speak. There's an impeachment going on. So we'll talk about it in that sense, but we're very careful about not advocating positions. What we try to do is help students practice the skills for positive civil discourse. So we'll facilitate discussions, and kids will, come up with their opinions and base their opinions on evidence. And then in my classroom, I encourage kids to disagree with each other, because I think it fosters really great discussion and learning. But again, we're teaching the skills for positive civil discourse. So politics will absolutely come up in the classroom, but as teachers, we never advocate for political positions. That's not our job.
Absolutely.
Yeah, if I could just build a little bit on what Chris said earlier. I mean, it wasn't even just the racial components of the Vote No campaign that were misleading. And as Dee Dee knows, they also threw out a lot of financial related misinformation, claiming there was wild amounts of spending on consultants or things like that, or sort of mangling the enrollment numbers to make it look like a new school wasn't needed. So it was basically a campaign of throwing a bunch of mud against the wall to see what stuck. And so that's something that we as the larger school community are going to have to work very hard to preempt and fight against for the next referendum campaign. So, and then the other thing I would say, as a parent who worked with ROAR and some of the other groups who were pushing for change in the equity space, one of the big misconceptions or pushbacks that we got from folks who maybe weren't as supportive of the equity work was the accusation that we were blaming the schools for the fact that there was racism going on in the schools, and that wasn't really, what we were after. We wanted to make sure that the schools, we know the school's not an iron dome that protects everything from the rest of the community. If there's racism or bullying or those sorts of things happening in the community, it's going to find its way into the schools. But what we want to make sure the district does is, set clear expectations for behavior, communicate, how students and teachers should react should an incident occur. When those incidents occur, that victims are being put at the center of the response, and that we're communicating with the community on a proactive basis. We shouldn't have to learn about a racist incident in our schools, being surprised by it on the news. Looking at our curriculum, making sure that we're teaching the right things and teaching them the right way. We just had a petition signed by 1,200 current and former students that talked about gaps that they saw in their experience in the schools. And then finally, the issue of staffing and making sure that the folks who are working in our schools look more like the kids in our schools. We're seeing increasing diversity in the kids in the schools. And, I know as of 2 years ago, we had I believe a single digit number of Black and Latino teachers in the district. So making sure that we're making progress there as well.
Yeah, Zach.
Sorry, I have one question for Dee Dee, and then I have one question for you, Addie. Sorry. Dee Dee, what would you, as somebody who runs finance for a public school district, what do you look for in your position, in your role, from elected officials as it relates to funding for the district?
Sure. Well, we at the school district do have conversations with our local legislators to have conversations about funding for school districts. And ideally, for instance, many organizations that are school supportive, such as Minnesota School Board Association, the Minnesota Association of School Business Officials, we bring forward a platform to talk about some of the things that school districts need. And by far the best way that a legislative body can provide funding to all schools is to increase the general education funding formula and tie that to the rate of inflation, which is what I think it was either Sean or Chris was talking about earlier, that gap. It's between $600 and $700 per student gap between if we had received an inflationary amount on that funding formula versus just a 2% here, maybe 1%, maybe zero, which has occurred. I mean, costs go up. Our salaries of our teachers, our supply costs, our utility costs, all of that goes up. So if it's not indexed against an inflationary factor, it just causes that spread greater. And then what happens is the school districts end up going to the local taxpayers to get permission to do an operating referenda to help bridge that gap. Did I answer your question, Zach? No.
It does actually. Yeah. No, I appreciate that. And then my question is sort of redirected back to you, Addie, then is someone who's seeking to be the state senator here for District 47. What do you propose to do to help people in a position like Dee Dee, the students that are here today, educators like Andrew Waller and Chris Commerce, and what do you propose to do specifically to help out our district, the neighboring districts around the state?
Mhm. Great question. And we've been getting this in the comments too. I do want to say I did film another video that you can watch offline. So for those in the comments, please go watch that as well. A big thing that I see at the legislature sometimes, but not nearly enough, is this relationship building. It's getting rid of all the rhetoric. It's actually talking to folks that you don't agree with and figuring out where you do agree. And that's how you get to a better piece of legislation. So when we talk about things like increasing funding, which I am fully on board, I would love to fully fund public education, hard stop. That's not going to happen overnight. That's not going to happen by just flipping the Senate. That's going to happen by getting folks there like myself who will build those relationships and bring all the experts to the table and find out the best way to make that happen. There's some funding mechanisms within the general fund. I think that could be tweaked a little bit, and I'm not going to get super policy wonky on you guys too, but other ways of opening up, new tax revenues might help as well. So reverting our funding structure from the state legislature back to pre-2008, maybe pre-2002 funding levels would be my number one priority in public education. So, and that kind of leads me to my next question too. We've had a lot of discussion about outside of this meeting about school choice and what that means. In my experience at the Capitol, I have learned that school choice is not the proper name for it, in my opinion. So I'm not for school choice for the voucher program. And maybe we can have Dee Dee or Chris talk about what school choice means and what the voucher program means. And then I can touch on why I'm not in support.
I always defer to Dee Dee. Dee Dee, would you like to go first, or?
Sure. So school choice just means that students have an opportunity to go to other schools. We have open enrollment where you can go to any school as long as their school is not filled. The voucher system is where the state of Minnesota would propose to pay a voucher to this, which would be comparable to what the state is paying on the per pupil amount to the parent, then to provide them that option to choose another school. Many times when you see school choice like that or open enrollment, it can provide a wider gap for the haves and the have-not. So students tend to go to schools that are what people would classify as good schools, quality schools, and they might be schools that are maybe not as diverse as other schools or not having the academic success, excuse me, as other schools. So there's a lot of issues, in my opinion, on that. Maybe Chris wants to do more of the opinion, and I'll give you more of just the facts.
Fair enough. Thanks, Dee Dee. Yes, I do think that we only have an hour, but I think right now, Secretary of Education at the federal level, Betsy DeVos, is talking about those schools that don't open 100% in person, that students ought to be able to take their money out of their school district, and that would follow them to a school of their choice, which she is, highly invested in private schools, and so the idea there is what she's really doing is talking about a voucher, at the federal level and local level, and not saying the word, because since the 1980s, the word voucher has really kind of I think we've fought that battle as a society, and we've decided that yes, we should have school choice, and we continue to support the schools in the areas in which we reside. We really think about, again, back to my earlier point about being a citizen. Regardless of where our children go to school, we want to make sure that other children have the opportunities and the opportunities for growth in academic and personal growth, so that we have a healthy society, that we preserve democracy. After all, sorry, as a history teacher, public schools were all about providing and strengthening our democracy in the early 1800s. That's the whole point. And so, yeah, I guess that's all I have to say about that.
Absolutely. And, we have here in Minnesota, it's in our Constitution. We have a legislative duty to make sure that we have proper public education. It's right there in the Constitution. So when we talk about things that might take tax dollars away from our public education systems and put them towards a private school, I'm not against private schools. I'm against taking tax dollars away from public schools to give them to private schools, to make that abundantly clear. And there's a lot of discussion around that that's not always clear, and it is a complicated issue. So I'm happy to discuss that further. For those in the comments that are asking, I'm happy to discuss that further at another time. But so we've got a couple remaining questions, a ton that came in on the chat. Thank you guys for commenting there. One is how will districts, talking about the COVID-19 situation, what are you guys looking forward? What are we looking for when Governor Walz comes out with his recommendations, I believe on Monday, tomorrow? And then how will districts cover classrooms with substitute teachers if teachers have to isolate, or students have to isolate if there's a positive test, if we're doing in-person learning? Let's go with the teachers first, and then parents, and then students.
Okay, I'll keep mine short. I don't know. And for the second question, I don't know. First, we have to wait on the governor's announcement. I think technically it's Wednesday. Correct me if I'm wrong. But we've been creating many plans and contingencies to those plans, and the contingencies to those plans. But there are about 1,000 questions that nobody has an answer to right now. So honestly, from a teacher's perspective, we have about as much information as a lot of parents do, because we're waiting on the announcement from the governor. With that said, I can say every single teacher that I have talked to really, really, really wants to get back into the classroom with their students. However, we all also realize that this is not based on our preference. It needs to be based on facts. It needs to be based on science, safety, and health. and our preference, and this is what we worry about as well, is just like everything else, it's become so politicized now. This shouldn't be a Republican or Democratic issue. This should be what's safe for our families, what's safe for our kids. And so what we want to do is we want to get back in the classroom, but we want to do it in a safe way. How we do that, we don't know yet. I don't know. Chris?
Thanks, Andrew. Well said. I've been, as a union leader for the Chaska Education Association, I've been working on this issue since late April. And basically, I should give you the 30-second version, right? The idea here is tied with our earlier conversation this afternoon. Andrew is spot on that we need to open our buildings safely. And this through no fault of anyone, except collectively as a society, we don't have the resources to do that. So what you're seeing at the national level is the president has asked the CDC to reconfigure earlier recommendations. Well, CEA and Education Minnesota continue to follow the initial CDC and Minnesota Department of Health guidelines, and they're too numerous to itemize here, but just think about one example. The idea that when we're indoors with masks on, we're no closer than 6 feet. Well, if you were going to do that in Eastern Carver County schools or any metro area school in Minnesota, you would need to reduce the number of students in the buildings, in most cases, to a third. With our plan that we've been working on, that number is 50% of students. And again, that is something that we hope, the plan and working out, 50% would be realistic. We still are working on the details, but a third, really, we don't have the funds to do that. And so when you are listening to teachers and seeing protests and demonstrations, as Andrew said, there's no place we'd rather be than in our classrooms with our students. That's why we got into this. That's why we're in this profession. And then when you introduce, decades of really a retraction of support for public education, we've kind of just continued down this road where the job has gotten more and more difficult. And our failed operating levy is just, the most recent example of that. But now you're going to say, here are these guidelines that we can do this, as Andrew says, based on science, but we don't have the resources to do that. So here's what we can do. Good luck. And I think that what, again, the no committee, the referendum folks, they've been trying the last few weeks and months to divide Eastern Carver County people on this issue. It's become another point in the culture war. Well, we're not going to allow that to happen. We're all in this together. Teachers have an incredible awareness of the difficulties that families are placed in. We get it. Many of us are caught in the same situation. Where will my children go when they're not doing the hybrid? Where will they be when they're not in school? We're in the same spot. And so we know that people have a monthly budget. We know that people are working to pay their mortgage. We know that people have health costs and all of these things. So I just say that passionately because we don't have any great solutions. We're doing the best we can, and we'll wait and we'll respond to the governor's announcement on Thursday.
If I could just add to that also, Chris, just from a human perspective, I would love to see our community come together on this. Where as from a teacher's perspective, we're members of the community too. You know, I feel teachers are sometimes feeling, I don't know, unnecessarily pressured these days. You know, you see the silly memes on the internet. If I can go to Target, why can't my kids go to school? It's clearly more complicated than that. And we see some of the ugliness, almost vilifying teachers these days if they're worried about going to school. And I think we need to see the humanity in each other as just neighbors. You know, we don't know what families are going through. My wife and I have already had the discussion. If we do have to go back to in-person learning, well, that probably means we can't see my in-laws anymore. We have to cut off the weekly visits with my father. We have an infant in the house, and recent research suggests that they can be just as vulnerable as adults because they haven't built up the immune system. So we have to be extremely careful with that. But we're not asking teachers to just suck it up and go back and just deal with it. We have to be compassionate with one another. Like I said, we want to get back in the classroom, but we're members of the community too. And I wish that we could take a community approach to this rather than, you know, let it devolve into political back and forth.
Absolutely. I'm in full agreement with that. I come from a family of educators, and I've talked with my cousin extensively on this. And she's an educator and just had a baby and is pregnant with her second one. And she's just terrified that they're kind of being used as pawns in this political discussion when it should be based on science. You're absolutely right. Sean, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to say from a parent perspective, you know, I think what we're all really looking for from the governor's announcement is some clarity. Give the districts a clear path to go down, clear guidelines, so that then the districts are able to take those next steps and communicate out to us as parents and students, so we know what to prepare for over this next month, so we can line up work schedules or work on childcare or do those other things that we'll need to do to be ready for it. So that's the big thing that we need from the governor this week is clarity, and try to take as much gray out of it as possible. I'm sure we won't be able to take all of it out, but at least give some clear standards for when we have to do what. So that's the big thing.
All right, we have one question in the comments a couple of times that I don't want to miss out on. I know we're short on time here. I'm going to kick it over to Zach for this one. Is there a chance of an operating levy on the ballot this year?
Great question. School board has to make that decision. Our public education advocacy group was trying to canvass the community here in April, May, and June, and COVID-19 had other plans for us. You know, with everything that's going on with health concerns and financial concerns in the home and in the community, I personally advocated to the school board recently that they put an operating levy on this fall. But this is ultimately their decision, and similar to the governor making a decision for what's going to happen within the classroom or not. So a lot of things to consider and weigh. I know that one of our neighboring districts in Shakopee is going out for an operating levy this November. And I know that Waconia, also in Carver County, their district is planning to go out for an operating levy. As far as what happens here, I hope that the school board here will consider doing it. But, you know, even if they decide not to, there's still a lot of work for us to do in terms of helping to build better support for the district, teachers, everybody here. And I will say the decision I'm most looking forward to coming up here is not necessarily Governor Walz's decision, because we'll try to do whatever we can to support that decision in our house. I'm most looking forward to who our teachers are going to be for our students here this fall, because whatever Walz's decision is and whatever the district decides to do, we want to be able to make those connections with the teachers for our kids at ASAP, so we can help support them and whatever they need from us as parents in the home to help support what they're doing with the classroom, in the classroom with the kids. So school board will decide that hopefully soon.
Addie, Zach is right, and teachers are desperate for an operating levy. We need it very, very badly so that we can serve our students and afford the schools they deserve.
Absolutely. I truly, truly hope that that happens. And I will do whatever I can to help make that happen as well, if anyone's got ideas. So, all right, last question is, why should we fund public education? Why should we fund education in general? Some of my phone calls I get with older voters in the district that don't have kids in the district, they're like, my kids have graduated. I don't really feel the need to fund education anymore. But it goes so much further beyond just education. So I don't know who wants to start with that one. Sean, Chris, somebody?
I guess I can start. I mean, I guess for me, people talk about America as being a land of opportunity. To me, public education is kind of the cornerstone of making that a reality for everyone. I've if everyone can get off on a good foot with public education and be prepared when they get through high school for whatever comes next for them, whether it's college, whether it's the military, whether it's entering the workforce, that goes a long way to taking some of the inequities that we have in our society and starting to move past them. Right now, unfortunately, we see that in our society are those areas where folks are already the most successful have the best public schools, and those areas which are already have been left behind economically, their schools are kind of in the same boat. So the more we can lift all schools, all public schools, and bring them together is how we make our society more equal and more productive for everyone.
I guess I would just add to that what Sean said. When we build up our schools, we're really building up our community, right? Education builds the community. And instead of, a community that relies on, people from other places to employ us, why not educate our youth and educate our own communities so that we have employers within the community? We can employ one another rather than, rely on everything else.
I'd like to hear from Natalie and Robbie, but I would just echo what's been said. I think a healthy, vibrant democracy depends upon preparing citizens, and that's what our public schools are all about. And the joy and fulfillment and happiness in one's life oftentimes is a result of a strong education.
I'd like to touch on the fact that not only does public school and public education help grow you as an academic, I think it also grows you as a person. I saw myself gaining new relationships, discovering passions, and sometimes I think a little piece of education could maybe be life or death. We're in the middle of a climate crisis, and thousands of people don't even believe that it's even happening. We have people who don't believe that masks work in a widespread public health crisis. So many tiny things that you wouldn't think would really help you in the real world or might not help you in college really actually does. And being publicly educated and being educated in those fields can really change the world and has huge impact.
Yeah, and kind of adding on to what Robbie said, and I think I forget who said this, but education really does build a community. It's not when you have a public education system, you don't just see people who have better test scores and stuff like that. You see statistically a better community. You see lower crime. You see higher income. You see just at a bare level, public education is fundamental to making sure that you have a good community. But I think on a more personal level, it also is extremely important to teach people how to be better people. I know in my own education system, I not only, taught or learned academically, but I also learned how to have empathy for others, how to build relationships, how to make friends, and things like that that you don't get without a public education system. And I know my older sister, who is now going to be a first-year teacher this next year, she is teaching in like K through 5 education, and she's seen what an impact in having empathy between teachers and students, and seeing the more formative work that education does. And so I think just it's so fundamental and important to our society to continue having opportunities for people to continue being better and growing and just creating a better community. Education has to be a fundamental part of it.
Did you want to add anything, Nadia?
I could say, building off of some of what Natalie says, like, various studies have shown that if you invest early in education, then you don't have to spend money later for things like the prison system or just social welfare systems, public health, just because people are able to support themselves. And just if you're able to complete high school, you have so many more job opportunities and opportunities for growth that if you just don't have a high school diploma, you just can't have those opportunities. And it does also just build a community around being educated and being able to make educated decisions and choices that without education, you're not going to be able to make.
Absolutely. So we've gone a little bit over time. Is there any closing comments that anyone wants to give? The floor is open. Anything you want to add to the discussion? This is, again, just a first step. There's going to be a lot more of these. So floor is yours. Anyone?
I just wanted to throw in one last comment that to the last question about why it's important to fund education. And I'm a firm believer in the phrase and the philosophy that by failing to prepare, you're preparing to fail. And I think that if we invest in education, there's what happens in the classroom. It's also what happens in between the classroom and all the activities around the school, the culture around the school. And I think that at the end of the day, better investment in education means a better experience for everybody. It means better actual academic education and that experience that prepares them for life. And just, strong schools, strong communities. There's a direct correlation there. That's all I got.
I would just add that I guess I want to say I appreciate us 9 people being able to come together and talk about this. I think what we're doing now and continuing conversations like this is so important, right? We're understand different perspectives in the community. I feel like our schools have been very strong here in Eastern Carver County, and I'd love to see that continue with connections with our community. I feel like as of late, there's been a strain. There's been a very for lack of a better term, anti-schools group out there, and it only gets exacerbated during elections. And no matter what happens come August or what happens come November, the people who voted no, or the people who voted a different way than what some agree with, they're still members of our community, right? People aren't leaving. They're still going to be here. They're still going to disagree. And I would love to see us as a community still come together and still have these conversations even after elections happen.
Yep, I agree 100%. There's a lot to be said for decorum and civility, and we could definitely use a lot more of that. So I'm hoping to bring that to the table as well. Any last comments before we let everyone go?
Addie, sorry, real quickly, Andrew, thank you for your comments about community. We're all going to get through this together, and we do need that collaboration and that cooperation. The teachers have endorsed you, Addie. Education Minnesota has given you an endorsement, and looking for the person who's now in the race. There are 4 candidates, 2 in the DFL primary on August 11th and 2 in the GOP primary on August 11th. And Addie was chosen by the Education Minnesota governing board as the most pro-education candidate. So thanks, Addie, for running.
It is absolutely my pleasure. I'm so proud to be from Carver County and to be a product of the public education system here, and proud to get in the fight for us. So thank you all. And thank you all for joining us. This is, like I said, first step, a lot of conversations that need to be had and a lot of work to do. So I really, really appreciate everyone's opinions and expertise to this conversation. For those of you watching, please reach out to me with any questions, comments, concerns you might have. And don't forget to vote in the primary as well. All right, everyone, have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much for joining, and we'll see you next week. Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Addie.
Thanks, Addie. Thanks, everyone.